So my name is Marc Battier. I'm from France, and I've been a composer all my life. But as many composers, I'm also a professor at the University of Sorbonne in Paris, and I'm one of the directors of the EMS 09 conference. It's, of course, actually a very good question and a very difficult one to answer. Ask anybody among us the same question, you may have different answers. But my definition is actually two things. One, it's a very wide, very open area for different kinds of musical practices, but they all involve technology. That's the first definition. But it could be, you know, live music, or it could be pre-recorded music. It could be music with computers in live computers or not. So there is a very wide range of musical practices. So that's the first definition. The second definition for me is that this is art music. Not necessarily concert music. It will be presented in other places like installation in museums, in galleries, or with video, you know, with films. But its aim is to be a work of art. So it could be live or whatever, it doesn't really matter, as long as the intention of that music is to be a work of art. Okay. For many years, since the beginning of this music, this electroacoustic music was another field, very different, because it was usually pre-recorded, done in recording studios or radio studios, not with live musicians. Since the 1980s, this has changed, and there is now another form of electroacoustic music called mixed music, in which you have electronic sounds played along with live musicians. Those live musicians have classical training in most cases. So they come from classical world, and somehow they want to enrich their own practice by working with electroacoustic music composers. And the result is that both fields have been enriched, they gained from that new encounter between technology and classical musicians. I don't mean to say that it's very wide or very general. It's only, you know, a small number of classical performers who are interested, but there are more and more. And of any kind of instrument, percussion, piano, and oboe, and violin, or harp, whatever. So the effect is that composers of electroacoustic music feel the need to write music for those performers as well. So the whole thing is developing, and I'm very happy to see that electroacoustic music is now all over the world. In fact, I was in Paris at the ERCAM recently, and there was a composer from Mongolia. You know, and of course, 10 years ago, that would have been impossible. So this field is also growing. The practice is more general, and as you mentioned, the classical performers are becoming more interested, at least some of them. Yes, the field of electroacoustic music never led to large gatherings or conferences, maybe once or twice in 60 years, so very few. What has changed has been the use of computers. With computers, you have so many things to develop: software and hardware, sound synthesis, and sound processing. So very quickly, during the 1970s, there was the need to meet. I was at the first large conference in 1977 that was in San Diego, California. It was the first conference called International Computer Music Conference, ICMC. That was the first. And there were maybe only 40 people in that conference. And then we had one in 78, and then we thought, well, maybe once every 2 years is enough. So we skipped 1979. In 1980, we met again. I think it was in Venice, Italy. And it was such a success that we decided to do it every year. But very quickly, what happened is that this conference became very technical. Techniques of sound synthesis, techniques of computing, and very little music in there. So I became disinterested with this conference, and I stopped going. And then I met Lee Landy, the other co-director, in 2002. In Marseille, we were invited as keynote in a conference on music and computing, and we thought, this is great, but we don't talk about music very much in those conferences. Why don't we do at least one conference to see where we would discuss the music? We were both musicologists and composers, and we thought we should really try to see if other people would be interested in meeting and discussing what we see about that music, how do we understand that music, and how we can analyze that music. So we did it the following year, in 2003, in Paris, at the Pompidou Center, which is a large art center, and it worked very well. But we thought maybe once every 2 years is enough. So we did the next one in Montreal in 2005, and people from all over the world came. And we thought, well, maybe, there is a large community which does not have a voice or a place to meet. Why don't we do it every year? And we did it every year ever since. So it's a conference which is devoted to the study of electroacoustic music, hence the name, Electroacoustic Music Studies Network. So now it's an association and a network, and we did it in various places. So in France, in North America, Canada, in England, and in China, and now in Buenos Aires. And next year in China, then we'll have it in New York, then we'll have it in Stockholm, and then in Brazil. So it will be, it will develop like this. Well, the expectation we had was that we could attract many researchers and composers from Latin America. That was the expectation. We thought it would be a success if we had many researchers and composers from Latin America, from all over Latin America. But we didn't know if it would work. When I arrived here, I looked at the numbers of papers from Latin American researchers and composers. I realized there were 16, which was by far the largest number of any other group. There were only 10 papers from Europe, and about, well, the rest were from various places: Canada, USA, New Zealand, Australia. There was one from China. It didn't come, but it was programmed. And so Latin American researchers and composers came, and not only from Argentina but also from Chile and from Venezuela and from Mexico and other places as well. So this I consider a big success. My country is the country in which it was born, in 1948. So in this conference, many people referred to the founders, of French electroacoustic music because it was the first country to invent that music. But very quickly, it developed in other countries, not only in Europe, also in North America and in Japan as well. So this music became worldwide, the practice became worldwide quite quickly. But it required technical means which were expensive, difficult to obtain, difficult to maintain, and difficult to use. So it was not easy to do music with those means. So this is why composers, for instance, from Argentina went to the countries which had those resources. For instance, Alcides Lanza went to New York, and other composers went to France or to Germany, where all those techniques were available to composers. Now, of course, things have changed, and the technology has become very portable and very affordable. You just need a small computer, a laptop computer, and some software. You don't even need good speakers. You can use headphones if you work at home. So because of that, you have people doing this music in any different style in many different countries. Now, the question is, are there differences between countries? I would say yes, there are. But at the same time, there is a common language which is evolving, but because people travel, composers from Argentina go and study in North America. But now it's very, very open, because composers from France can go study in Japan, for instance, or in China. So it works both ways. Or they can come to Argentina as well. There aren't very many, but it's possible. So we have an exchange, a vision of exchange. So this will change things, I think, quite a bit, because you have, for instance, a strong tradition of music in Argentina, and I refer to tango in particular. And if you go work in Venezuela, then there's another musical tradition. It's not tango, it's something else. So that music, in fact, that local music appears transformed in electroacoustic music. I've been always very interested by the music of Argentinian composers, because they have something which relates to rhythms that we don't have in Europe or in North America. So they bring something of their own culture, even though they use technology and modern means of making music. They bring their own culture, which somehow, emerges in their music. So it's very, very interesting. And we have the same thing for Chinese composers, with the spirituality and Buddhism, for instance, which also appears in their music. Well, I could, but maybe I would be wrong to do that. But I can try, because there is a strong tradition in my country of working with natural sounds, what is called musique concrète. That music was born as musique concrète. In fact, the word electroacoustic music came much later, let's say around late 50s, early 60s, so about 10, 12 years after the beginning of that music. It had other names before. In France, it was called musique concrète. Then it was called briefly experimental music. In Germany, it was called electronic music. In North America, it was called tape music, so it had different names. Now there's a general term, electroacoustic, so it's a blend of acoustic sound and electronic means, and also electronic sounds. So in France, there's a strong tradition of working with natural sounds. But of course, that tradition has been enriched. There are other practices now, and I would say that in France was born in the 70s a strong tradition of mixed music, that is electronic sounds or electronic processing with live instruments. It's not only in France, but in France, because of certain institutes and technical possibilities, that became quite widespread. And many people from other countries came and are still coming to France because of all this environment. Well, as you know, when you predict the future, you are almost always wrong. No one that I know has been able to predict the future and to see that future arrive. So, I will not predict the future, but what I can say is that I am very optimistic. I've been in this field for 40 years, and I've seen the field change, but mostly I've seen the field grow. Of course, I've seen new technology like the computer arrive, and that has, changed things a lot, but I've seen the field grow all across the world. I was mentioning this composer from Mongolia. I could mention composers from other strange countries as well in Central Asia, for instance. So it's growing, so that makes me very optimistic. And also, composers have now much more possibilities to have their music performed. Festivals, there are now many festivals. We always complain that we don't get played very much, but it's not true. We are played much more than 10 or 20 years ago on the radio and in festivals, even CDs. No, nobody buys CDs now these days, we know that, but the CDs are still produced because that's a nice way to preserve the music. And you can give CDs to your friends. So CDs and festivals, concerts and radio, there hasn't been so many opportunities ever. So I am at least optimistic. I cannot predict the future, but I'm very optimistic.